Hello, welcome to TIU Global Dialogue. My name is Heki Ni, an Associate Professor of International Relations at Tokyo International University. It is an honor to have Professor Gerald Chan with us today. Before we start the webinar, allow me to provide some background information regarding the TIU Global Dialogue. The TIU Global Dialogue is a speaker series organized by Tokyo International University's e-track program in the fields of international relations. Established in 2019, the TIU Global Dialogue brings top experts, academics, and policy practitioners in different fields, including politics, diplomacy, military, economics, and industry, to TIU to share their research findings and discuss the issues of strategic importance to Japan and the world. Our honorable speaker today, Professor Gerald Chan, is the Professor Emeritus of Politics and International Relations at University of Auckland in New Zealand. He has held various teaching and faculty positions in different parts of the world, such as Victoria University of Wellington, Chinese University of Hong Kong, National University of Singapore, Cambridge University, and also Kobe Gakuin University here in Japan. Professor Chan is also a life member of Care Hall at Cambridge and was previously the head of the School of Politics and International Relations in the University of Auckland. Professor Chan is an expert in Chinese foreign policy and has published extensively in academic journals and publishes. He also delivered a fascinating TED Talk in 2015, and the topic is about whether China can connect the world through the high-speed railway. And you can now enjoy it on YouTube. However, from a perspective, the greatest achievement of Professor Chan's research would be he has already published 3 books in the past 5 years regarding China's Belt and Road Initiative. The first one in 2018 is about China's Belt and Road Initiative and the Silk Road and the bullet train. The second one in 2020, this is about the China's Maritime Silk Road. And the third one actually would be last year, the latest one. This is about the China's Digital Silk Road. And right now today, we have the honor by inviting Professor Chan to share his latest research, which is the 4th one in the series. This is about global health, China's health in Silk Road, or you can say this is a China's health Silk Road. And the topic here would be, can China's billionaires help to save the world from the pandemics? Without further delay, Professor Chan, the floor is now yours. You can now share your
Well, thank you very much, Professor Lee. It's very kind of you to introduce me to this very important Global Dialogue series. I'm so delighted to be able to engage with the Global Dialogue series and to exchange views with the audience here. So it's lovely to be here. Let me go straight to the talk. I suppose I've got about 25 minutes or so for the talk, isn't it? And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So I'll go straight to the share screen to start my PowerPoint slides here. So let me know if you can see the screen, any one of you. You can. Okay, yeah. This is the title of the talk. Professor Lee has already mentioned about that. I've highlighted the word billionaire in the title in red here, just to signal that this is a very new feature of China's aid diplomacy and also in vaccine diplomacy in the past couple of years during the COVID pandemic. My purpose of today's talk is basically to share with you my current research on China's Health Silk Road, which, as you all know, is part and parcel of China's Belt and Road Initiative. Especially, I'm trying to look into how China has handled the pandemic domestically as well as internationally. To do this, I have to give you some background about the Belt and Road Initiative so that I can position my talk against this background. I shall be pretty brief here. I'm sure most of you will know that the Belt and Road Initiative is a huge project by China trying to connect with various parts of the world through hard infrastructure as well as soft ones. It is called the billion-dollar infrastructure. So it's obviously a huge, huge project. Well, how to imagine trillion dollars here? We have just come across a few days ago that the Stockholm think tank, the CIPRI, saying that last year was the highest expenditure of military by the world powers, and that amount was $2.2 trillion. So last year, in fact, the world spent total together about $2.2 trillion in a single year. Whereas China's $1 trillion is already huge. It has been spending that sort of money over about 10 years by now, started in 2013 by President Xi Jinping. It is commonly known as China's major foreign policy. Some call it primary signature or flagship, to stress the importance of this particular Chinese external relations. I myself try to put this Belt and Road Initiative into 4 major components: the land part, the maritime component, the digital one, and the health one. And how they are connected is, in fact, fairly intimate. They are interlinked with each other. But I'll put digital as the overall, overarching sort of umbrella supporting the various aspects, various components of the Belt and Road, whether it is overland or maritime or health, because we're entering into a digital age, and China's advanced technology has been supporting all various aspects of China's push in the Belt and Road. Professor Lee has kindly introduced these books to you, so I don't have to repeat here. From the last one, which is in 2022, the book cover is on the right here, China's Digital Silk Road. And you can see the cover design, which shows basically the area I have been covering in China's AI development, artificial intelligence, 5G. In fact, I know China is into 6G now, but 5G is the dominant sort of generation of technology here. The digital yuan, the e-currency, China has been spreading out around the country, so much so that China is in fact the largest e-currency country in the world. China is gradually becoming a cashless society. You don't have to use cash now. You use your mobile phone to pay. And even some accept face recognition. You just walk in, get the things you want from a certain supermarket and go out without having to go through any exchange of money or show your phone to purchase. So it's so very convenient. But of course, there is also the issue of privacy there about personal information. I also look into the space exploration. It's part and parcel of China's science and IT development. Many of you are familiar with many of these maps about China's connections through the road and the belt. And this one is overland. We know that the overland Silk Road covers a lot of things. It's roads, it's rails, it's bridges, trade hubs, so on and so forth. In fact, they are not simple single roads as simple as this on the map. In fact, there are a network, a system of connections between China and Europe. Very quickly, perhaps I'll say a word or two about the various route. This one is the traditional one, the northern route going through Russia and Ukraine. Because of the war in Ukraine, it has been seldomly used. Instead, countries try to use the middle corridor, going through Central Asia and through Turkey to Europe. The orange line here is the maritime Silk Road instead. Talking about the maritime Silk Road, this is the one I've just mentioned. It's going through the Malacca Strait in Southeast Asia to the Indian Ocean, the Red Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea. The second route that I have sort of identified is the one that goes through Southeast Asia to Australia, to New Zealand, and then to the island states in the South Pacific, which is not shown on this map. And the third route is called the Polar Silk Road. Many of you will be aware that as a result of climate change and global warming, and therefore there is a lot of ice being melted in the Arctic, and countries find it a new route to explore, easier to go through because of melting ice. So this is the one route of the Polar Silk Road. And of course, this is going through the northern Arctic region of Russia. There is another one which goes through the northern Arctic region of Canada, which is not shown on this map. The Polar Silk Road is now still being explored because of the potentials for use as an additional alternative route to connect Asia, Southeast Asia, well, including Southeast Asia, if they want to go through this way. Basically, it's China, Korea, and Japan can make use of that route to go to Northern Europe through the Northern Arctic. Basically, China is building a lot of ports along the way in the Indian Ocean, in Western Europe, in East Africa. Shipping is the main sort of focus here. Apart from that, of course, it's building a lot of logistics along the way, like warehousing, ship repair factories, and wharves of one kind or another, and leading to inland areas connecting with the land component of the Silk Road. This is the digital Silk Road that I'm coming to. Basically, it's a whole raft of high tech that China is developing, including 5G, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, blockchain, so on and so forth. I've mentioned about the digital yuan, so I won't say too much on this, to be brief. The cable is important for providing connections because a lot of our digital data goes goes through the maritime submarine cables. This map here shows you the network of various sea cables. This is basically the channels through which our data goes through. Almost up to 95% of all the data goes through the maritime and the land cables. The space satellites also provide some. They are more expensive on the one hand. On the other, they are highly sophisticated and more expensive, and it's not commonly used unless for things such as very remote areas where there is no land connection, or when there is natural disasters of one kind or another, that the land cable is disrupted. So you have to use satellite transmission. The interesting is the China's space station, which is now in orbit for quite some time now, over a year. It is now more or less in full function towards the end of this year. In fact, it will be in full operation. And this is distinctly important because at present, there are only 2 space stations in the world circulating around the Earth. One is the International Space Station, which is a US one, but this one is going to retire fairly soon. It's expected to be discommissioned in 3 to 5 years. So in that sort of time frame, the only space station that will be circulating the world, the Earth, is the Chinese one. It's called a Tiangong space station. It is a much more modern space station, so it will be able to carry on doing a lot of experiments, which we cannot do, or which can supplement a lot of work we can do on Earth. And China is welcoming other countries to join the space station to work there with the Chinese astronauts. But then you have to learn about the Chinese way of doing things and perhaps some Chinese language as well. That will be more efficient and effective. The Health Silk Road is my current sort of research. It occupies a major part of my research time these days. Looking into COVID-19 that China is developing into, I'm just picking out 1 or 2 points here to talk about. There are lots of things I can sort of discuss with you. Developing e-health, digital health is important. China is not the first one to do this. In fact, it is way behind other countries. It's a latecomer to this area. The US is the first one. But China is moving so very fast that like internet hospital, digital health care provisions, that it's becoming more common, especially during the COVID times when people are locked down. So they have to go through digital means in order to receive healthcare, whether it is the consultation with doctors, whether it is diagnosis, even some operations can be done remotely, and then the dispensation of pharmacies and medicines and so on can be done online. So China, in fact, is catching up very fast and becoming a major actor in this region in this area of development, as well as the development of pharmaceuticals, manufacturing of drugs. We have witnessed a couple of years China has started to become the huge competitor in global manufacture of pharmaceuticals. So it is going on a path, a trend, a trajectory in which it aims to become, it aspires to become a superpower in pharmaceuticals. That's China. The other issue that I would like to look into is, in fact, the age-old debate about patient rights versus patent rights. Patient rights basically simply refers to, in a simple way to understand it, it is the rights of patients to be able to get convenient, easy access to life-saving drugs at a reasonable price. That's the rights of patients, and it has been enshrined in various human rights documents in the UN, whether it is the Human Rights Declaration, international human rights law, including the 2 international covenants, one covering political, economic, and social rights, and the other is economic and social rights, development and social rights, and various instruments of the UN. It is regarded as a kind of human rights. And patient rights, on the other hand, is the rights of the drug manufacturers, the pharmaceutical companies, the big pharmas, as it were, that they hold on to determine the manufacture, the distribution, and the pricing of drugs that they produce. So they hold on to these rights and not to negotiate price with others to maximize their profits from their research and investments. So these two sets of rights are more or less at the opposite end and opposing each other. And China, what is China's position in this? It seems to me that China is between a rock and a hard place. On the one hand, China is siding with the countries in the global south to recognize patient rights as human rights. But on the other hand, China is becoming a big pharmaceutical company. It is producing drugs, it is producing medical equipment, it is designing medical devices and getting a lot of its intellectual property registered with international organizations. So it is a huge benefactor of royalties on the other hand. So where does China sit in this sort of opposite positions? That's something that I would like to look into. The other one, of course, is vaccine diplomacy. And China, again, is a latecomer to this. However, China is the largest exporter of COVID vaccines in 2021. We know that COVID started in Wuhan in China in late 2019. So within a year or two, China has become the largest exporter of vaccines to various parts of the world. I've got a source reference here. You can check the timing of China's exports of its vaccines to various parts of the world. But because vaccine, the disease itself, the pandemic itself is subsiding somewhat, especially in the Western world, there is less reporting. Countries are resuming to some sort of normality these days. That China also has shifted its focus from exporting vaccines to the kind of helping developing countries to secure their capacity to deal with future pandemics. So it means technology transfer It means helping those countries, especially in Africa, to develop their ability to produce drugs and to deal with spread and prevention of future pandemics. So that's what China's focus has been moving. The other interesting feature is about the Chinese billionaires that I mentioned in my topic. Are they coming to the rescue to help the global poor? In fact, Chinese billionaires has been increasing in numbers over the past 20 odd years, so much so that China has the largest number of billionaires in the world these days. And this graph shows us how China compares with the USA. And the crossover year is 2016. That's the year when China's billionaire, the number of them has surpassed the US. And the trend for China is the blue line here, will trend upwards. So it will be increasing in the number of these super rich. Although these numbers can shift from time to time, and depending on your count, how you are going to count it, the reporting, the sources, and so on and so forth. But the general understanding is that China has been trending upwards vis-a-vis the USA. And together, these two countries have the majority of the rich people in the world. So who are the Chinese philanthropies? There are many. Jack Ma is one of them. Alibaba is his company that he founded. Tencent, another major IT company, entertainment software. Huawei, we all know Huawei. Baidu, it's another IT giant in China. Evergrande, a major real estate company, having some troubles some years back. And there are many others. If we look at the number of foundations, that might give us ideas of how the rich in China are increasing. In the year 2012, there were 3,000 of these foundations funded by rich people, basically. Some 10 years later, towards the end of 2021, there were close to 9,000 of these foundations. So that will give us some indication, some indicator to us to see how China's rich people have been increasing in size. And they are helping in various ways. Donation money is one of those ways. And here is a graph trying to compare China big donors with those of the USA, basically. Number one on the list is someone called Jack Dorsey. Some of you may be aware that he was the former boss of Twitter. Now is, of course, Elon Musk. He was, in fact, the co-founder of Twitter. ByteDance, again, you will know that is the parent company of TikTok. And then Bill Gates and his wife, Melinda. And then Google, MasterCard, and then Alibaba. So the majority of donations in cash is basically still dominated by the US and by Chinese philanthropists. Apart from money, apart from vaccines, Jack Ma has been donated, leading the donation of a lot of PPEs. These are personal protective equipment, like face masks, test kits, ventilators, so on and so forth, to 150 countries around the world, basically, whether it's rich or poor. In fact, one of the earlier dispatches of Jack Ma's supplies went to the USA, because the US doesn't produce these kind of low value equipment. They have all outsourced overseas. Once it's in short supply, the US has to import them. And Jack Ma has been doing that very efficiently, basically because he has developed a huge network of e-commerce around the world, able to shift goods around the world from A to B within a very short period of time, competing with Amazon and beating Amazon on many fronts as well. So, well, we are not over yet with COVID-19, but of course, this table only shows how vulnerable that we are. We are still in the grip of COVID-19, but we don't know when the next big one is going to come. So we have to prepare, and the world is preparing for that, for any major ones. And this is a brief sort of list of the major ones that you can see, ranging from the Black Death early on in the 14th century to the current situation. But there are a lot of other pandemics and in various parts of the world which are not on this list. So it's still being part of our human being. We have to live with them and to deal with them. Let me end with this final part. I would like to offer some food for thought here, questions that we might be able to explore a bit further if we want to, if we are interested. Is this Chinese generosity of this rich philanthropies, billionaires, a flash in the pan? In other words, is it one single event? Or would that be repeated when there are other disasters coming up in future? We have to wait and see. But the Chinese have demonstrated that they have done something for the public good during the COVID times. Secondly, an interesting question is, because of the Chinese government system, they are not planned to create billionaires, but the open and reform policy started by Deng Xiaoping has led to the current situation that we are experiencing. And therefore, how China, especially the Chinese Communist Party and its ideology, trying to deal with these very rich people. I just mentioned about common prosperity as one way in which the Chinese is trying to deal with this, trying to spread the wealth of the very super rich more evenly across the population. Billionaires of the world, are they united? Surely the rich people, they have their own network, and they stand as one of the aspects that interested scholars are looking at as a source of imperialism and post-colonialism. The billionaires, somehow they are in the position to exploit the rest of the world through various means, even including legal means, because of how the global political system is being set up, the global political economy system, in fact. The pharmaceutical companies of the world, they work together sometimes, especially those in the West, but they also compete fiercely amongst themselves, and also with pharmaceutical companies coming from East Asia. It's not only China, it is India, it is Japan, it is Korea. They are starting to produce on their own various aspects of sectors of the pharmaceutical industry. Leaving the poor people like many of you and me, whether we should unite in some ways to deal with this issue, either through our politicians, through NGOs, through civil society, or we will be subject to a lot of exploitation, sometimes covertly, sometimes overtly, that we are having to face with. There is some ideological underpinning in this question here. The other interesting question, number 6, is that that China has been showing to the world that it has been quite successful in its development, and therefore state capitalism, Chinese style, is something that other countries are trying to learn from, compare with, and using, in fact, a lot of industrial policies that China, as well as the emerging economies before China in East Asia, through the developmental capitalism way of development, has been showing that there are many forms of capitalisms. Are we venturing into a brave new world? I would think so. And the Chinese contribution towards this new world order very recently are 3 major initiatives. The Global Development Initiative in 2021, followed by the Global Security Initiative, and this year, the Global Civilization Initiative. We don't have much time for me here to explain about this, but it seems to me that this tripartite system of China is likely to project Chinese vision of its global order. Apart from vision, China is trying to put this into practice, especially the development initiative, supplementing the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a table that I've constructed particularly for this Global Dialogue series. I don't want to go into the details, but to say that the aim of the GDI is to alleviate poverty. The other 2 are to develop common security and sort of common understanding among civilizations and cultures. How many projects are there? According to a Chinese official count, there are 50 projects that are ongoing, and all of them, if not all, the majority of them are tied with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And the top agenda is to remove poverty. The fact that China has done something useful to bring together into reconciliation between Iran and Saudi Arabia has observers saying that China may be going into this kind of area to serve as a mediator in various parts of the world. Still minimal compared with other Western countries, but there is this kind of trend. And then the Civilization Initiative, there are lots of soft power projects that we can look into. My last slide, basically asking ourselves whether it's the brave new world. My focus, as I would like to, if the chance to discuss with you, is how the world order is being nurtured, competed, work together against each other in a world in which there is the superpower rivalry between China and the US. So that will be the focus, perhaps, of our future development in this area, in theory and in practice. So, Professor Lee, that's the end of the talk. Thank you so much for your attention.
Well, please join us to, again, thank you, Professor Chan here. We'll have the Q&A very soon here, but thank you so much, Professor Chan.
Hopefully there is still some time for Q&A.
Sure. But as a moderator, I got a quick question here because we have students from globalization, Chinese politics, and out of China here. So my question, perhaps if we have time, we can come back, but if not, then I will give time to other students here. But my question here would be, we are talking about common prosperity from the Chinese narrative. They want to do international public good. And we now have more exchange, more communications here. So things like this happen when China advocate maritime Silk Road, bullet train, or the digital Silk Road here. Seems like China is helping other countries and building the common good in the world. But now, if you refer to the health issues, I guess that we don't have any controversial issues regarding helping those people, get them, vaccinated, that kind of stuff here. But why? We still have some Western countries, the United States, they want to compete with China. They want to, let's say, label the Chinese vaccines diplomacy as a kind of upsetting the current world order, that kind of stuff here. So I guess that my question is very broad. Sorry about that. But if we have time, we can come back later. Because I see some questions already on Zoom and also in the floor. So let me just ask the students in the classroom first and see if we have any student who would like to have the first questions here in the classroom. Anyone? Yes, please. Okay. Well, I now turn the, well, this is also the microphone as well.
Nice to see you all here.
Okay, you can start now. A very brief question, please.
Okay. Hello, Professor, and thank you for your presentation. It was very insightful. I do have some questions regarding the charity foundations, which is based on the billionaires in China that you listed. So I do know that Huawei is suffering from the US trade embargo, and with Jack Ma, I remember that he had an IPO for his company, and it had some elements that were criticizing the CCP, and I think currently he's in hiding. With Evergrande, I do know that there's real estate bubble, and it was corrupt, and it was under restructuring. With TikTok as well, you see that the US is targeting them recently as well. So do you think that these events have sort of reduce the wealth and the reach of this class of billionaires that are giving away in philanthropy? And if there is that, is there a US effort to sort of limit the reach of these billionaires?
Okay, there are two questions there. Is the reach assets being reduced? I think the idea of President Xi Jinping's common prosperity has that sort of effect. I wouldn't say it is designed to aim at the rich alone, but it has the effect, because the policy of spreading wealth more evenly amongst various regions, especially region to the west and in central China, compared with the eastern coast. There is the objective of helping the poorer people to come up with a fairer share of the production of the whole country. The reason for doing that are many. It could be ideological, it could be political, it could be social stability that Xi Jinping and his advisors have in mind. But that sort of possibility is there. To how much is that property of the rich class being reduced? I don't know. One has to wait for a certain period of time before we can do some useful calculation and projections. But again, there are difficulties involved in measuring that, because what sort of standards do we use? Because we are looking into a kind of a future projection. And there are other factors which we are not so sure about. But the general trend is that it has reduced the laissez-faire sort of situation for the rich to grow even richer. So there is some limitations to that in a system like China. because there are also legal implications for that. Because if something goes wrong with the very adventurous, risky projects, but very profitable projects that the rich people in China have been free to develop, if something goes wrong, who is to bear the responsibility? It is ultimately the government, and in the case of China, it is the Communist Party. So they have to do something from their perspective. Unless the country has come to a certain sort of situation in which it is very stabilized and the legal system is very strong. When I say very strong, it's comparable to the West, then you might have a different sort of economic policies and liberalism towards the rich. So that perhaps is one question. The other question is about the US approach towards China. And this ties in with Professor Lee's question as well. There are so many politicization involved here, especially the kind of decoupling policy that the US has adopted since Donald Trump in 2018, and the sanctions of various Chinese companies, increasing number of them, having the effect of damming down China's growth trajectory. I think superpower rivalry is at play here, especially it has never before that China has come to this stage of growing so very fast over the past 4 decades, that it has shaken the sort of understanding and foundations of cooperation with China from Western perspective. And especially when there are different elements within the US politics, the political body polity, in which when the more hawkish elements are coming in power, that might put pressure on China. Often the reason cited by the US in the lead, of course, other Western allies are being pulled by the US influence here, being rallied to clamp down on China here. This is from China's perspective, by the way, that the US is stirring the fear of China, that and using the reason of national security. Basically, it's repeating over and over again without giving very strong evidence of what sort of security risk, what sort of security damage that has been done. This is something that is quite against the US rule of law understanding. There is no firing gun, as it were. There are suspicions of possible risks that China is posing to the rest of the world. A good example is TikTok. There's so much talk about TikTok being a national security risk to the US and now to many Western countries adopting a similar policy of the US. But so far, there is no concrete sort of evidence that has been put forward in the global audience. What sort of evidence that the US has? It hasn't released that to the rest of the world. But based on that, and also a lot of American acts and American local legislations, domestic jurisdiction, to put pressure on China. Not only on China, because there are also effects on other countries as well. So to me, there is quite a lot of politics, geopolitics involved, rather than a kind of a fair play rule of international. There are some elements of that, but it's not the basic one. I think the kind of competition to rivalry is the main drivers here. I may be wrong here. it's also very controversial, this kind of way of looking at things. But that's how I feel, and I'd be open. In the open, in fact, I know it's in Facebook, so it's all open.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chan. We have 11 questions in waiting. I will try to pick some of them here. We have no time to address all the questions, but some of them point to the role of billionaires in China. So some ask about the ethical implications, and others, I guess, that they're asking something like, how can this be? I mean, would the increase of the billionaires actually, they have some sorts of, I mean, pressures from the government, whether they have to donate their money in the future or not, right? We also got, whether they have to perhaps act according to the Chinese government policy or as a part of the Chinese public diplomacy when it is needed, right? And some other students or maybe respondents also refer to the last one here. We have the very mysterious cases about Jack Ma. He paid a low profile suddenly. So what's the role of the billionaires regarding whether they can act independently or what kind of ethical implications for them to China and also to the world? Can you just, I know this is
I think there are lots of interesting questions surrounding this. So perhaps I'll just sort of jump from one to the other without a very coherent answer to that. Basically, the ethical sort of issue here, of course, ethics is an area in which is very value laden. It depends on the standard of ethics of various countries. I won't say there is a single standard here. Like the issue of human rights, like the issue of democracy, I would suggest that it is sometimes useful to look at that in a relative sense. Although there are elements of universality here, which most people would agree to, but there are also a lot of different aspects. Different countries, cultures, and societies may have different ways of looking at the issue of ethics. The case of China, the case of Jack Ma, the case of the very rich in China. I think there are things that we don't know very much indeed, unless we are following that very closely and in China and also in the decision-making circles. There are things we don't really know. But from the sort of media reporting, we know that Jack Ma has been sort of clamped down by the government. He has become a little bit quiet here, although he reappeared in Hangzhou recently, and also he visited overseas countries as well. So, but I do think that from the perspective of the rulers of China, those who are in the position of government, they have somehow to balance between a greater degree of liberalism, continuing away with the development of IT, which is a new area to China without much regulations initially, to something that there are ramifications if it is absolutely free for all sort of situation to get rich quick. Then there will be negative impacts on the rest of society. So a decision maker has to balance that sort of various pulls and pushes of a policy. I hope that the general trend will be increasingly more liberal, which I feel China is doing that. But that kind of speed of liberalizing, sometimes it's a two steps forward and one step back. It is not a straightforward, straight line of path. So there are ways in which, if we want to be critical of China, we can always find some areas in which we can criticize China on that. which is a fair criticism based on a particular point in time, a particular issue. But overall, I think China is progressing and improving along the way, but not at a speed desired by some of the Western observers and critiques. And even within China itself, there are different opinions about the speed with which things are moving. And given China is so big a country, there are so many aspects that needs to be balanced one against each other in order to have a sort of a more stable society to move collectively forward. That has been the mentality of the Chinese. Stability is important. We should, the Chinese should have a kind of a situation in which people can find a good life and have sufficient to cater for in their increasing cost of living. So those are the important issues. But there are also other issues that can be criticized on various grounds. And I do buy with that. But the trend, I do think is moving more positively rather than negatively.
Thank you.
And apart from that, of course, there is geopolitics. There is, even countries may or may not agree with each other. Sometimes countries do appear to agree with each other, but privately they have different ideas behind the scene. Yeah. A good example is France. President Macron, and what they are talking with Chinese leaders behind the scene may be different from what they say to the public, to the media.
Well, exactly. Professor Chan, we have not enough time here, and I got some more questions from the classroom, but we can only have the last question here. So I got a question from a student. I think the question is quite important because it's relevant to the Chinese soft power, especially something you mentioned in the last slide regarding the future. If we have similar COVID-19 crisis in the coming future, what should be done, or what could we, address to the issue here? So, Belle, would you like to ask that question by yourself here, since you're here, right? Yeah. Yeah, go up to the front. Sure, please, yes.
Hello, Professor Chan.
Hello, thank you.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much for your talk today. I really appreciate your time and effort in giving us really great lecture. So I want to ask, how is the transparency of this route and the spread of COVID-19 affect the Chinese health Silk Road in gaining its reputation or gaining its trust from the world? Thank you.
All right, yeah. Well, if we use an American point of view, these days, whatever China does is negative, including COVID-19. But if you look from the perspective of the developing countries, especially those in Africa, they are so very grateful to China for the various vaccines and face masks and other materials that have been sent to them. So it really depends on who you are, where you stand, and what's your relationship with China itself. There could be so many points of criticisms of China of how it's handled the situation. It depends on which period you are looking into, which particular aspects. For those who are being locked down for a long period of time, especially young people, it's a bit difficult experience for them. Compare with people in the rural areas, elderly people, they might have different ideas. It's very difficult to get a single idea that will buy everyone together. There are so many issues of, the initial outbreak, the initial sort of Chinese response to the middle part, and then to the zero COVID, and then to the ditching of the COVID itself, zero COVID policy itself, now into the current situation. So there are so many things that we can discuss. The picture is pretty mixed here. It's very difficult to give a proper scorecard to China, which is fair to the country and to the other people outside of China. So it might take a few years, perhaps, when things have settled down, when scholars are still interested in this area, that might come up with some judicious research, in-depth research to come up with a good answer. I don't have that sort of answer. I can see a very mixed patch there. There are things that China has done very quickly, very efficiently, and there are things that they have failed to do, just like a country like Taiwan and Singapore, and like Hong Kong too as well, and like New Zealand. New Zealand has been praised for doing things very scientifically, but there within New Zealand itself, there are lots of criticisms from the marginalized groups of people. So it depends on who you are, where you stand, where you sit, what's your angle, what's your relationship, and what particular issues you are experienced with. I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer, a single good answer. Some people would like to press me from 1 to 10, what's your score of China? It's so very difficult.
Well, agree. Thank you so much, Professor Chan. Well, we are about to end up the seminar here. Professor Lamont, do you have any last comments, remark?
Just thank you, everybody, for attending, and thank you, Professor Chan, for a wonderful and very insightful presentation. Thank you.
Okay, so
Yeah, my great pleasure.
well, please join us to thank you once again, Professor Chan.
I should say, arigato gozaimashita.
Okay, thank you. So this is the end of the seminar. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.